We're going to try to paint this, and we're going to enlarge this sketch by using a 1/2-inch grid on here, and I've numbered it 1 through 6 and A through H. And when I did the measuring, I counted off that there are 6 by 8 small sketch. On the small sketch, I have 6 by 8 squares. So I cut my watercolor paper to 8 by 10, and then I divided 8 by 6, and I got 1.3, and I divided 10 by 8, and I got 1.2. So I rounded it. I took the smaller of the two sizes, and I rounded it down. So I made sure that I'm using 1.2, which is about 1 1/4 inches. And then I made my grid on my very thin printer paper so that it's 1 1/4 inches. So each one of these blocks is 1 1/4 inches. And then I numbered it the same as the small grid. I have my letters at the top and my numbers on the side, same as this one. And now I'm going to draw this block by block. And you can section off the blocks if you want by taking a strip of paper and just doing one section at a time like that. Or you can cut a hole in it so it's a small 1/2-inch square and just move it a little at a time. Or you can leave it open and do the whole thing. Once you have it transferred, you're going to use your transfer paper and put it on the watercolor paper. But it's good to do it on this thin printer paper because it's not going to mar the paper when you do some erasing. So once you've looked at your grid, your small grid, and you've enlarged it to the best of your ability, I recommend that you turn it upside down, both of these, and really take a look at it again and make sure that you haven't missed any lines. And then erase your grid lines and darken the lines that you want to keep before you transfer it, so you're not accidentally transferring your grid lines onto your watercolor paper. And you're going to want to do that while your watercolor paper is still dry. So put your graphite paper between, tape it so it doesn't slide around. Use your masking tape and redraw all the lines. After you've redrawn all the lines, then pick it up at a corner and just check and see if you missed anything before you take it off. It's really hard to line it up again afterwards. So I recommend using only like 2 tabs of tape at one side. So if I was going to transfer it here, I would tab it there or put it upside down and put my tabs of tape here and here so that I could lift it and check. So once you've transferred and maybe darkened some of your pencil lines, before you wet the paper, use your kneaded eraser, make sure it's clean, and just do a little bit of pulling of the pencil lines before you wet the paper. It's easier to do it before it's wet. Once it's wet, it kind of, the graphite is pretty well set in there by the water. So just go through, and any of the lines that are, you know, really standing out too much, just kind of pull it and you'll see this starting to blacken. So you can still see what you've got here, but it's more like a ghost image. So I've wet the paper on both sides. You can see it's a little shiny. And hold it by one corner, so the corner's down, and let it drip until you just see 1 or 2 drops at a time coming off. Then lay it on a towel and absorb most of the surface water. You don't want to be rubbing it. You just, like, you don't want to rub the towel around. You can rub your hands across the towel. And then I would turn it and do it again in case you missed a spot. Then you're going to use your board. Make sure that it's dry. Place your, yeah, that's not going to fit so well. Place that on and use your tape. So I'm using masking tape. I'm going to make it a little bit longer than I need. Place it halfway over or a quarter of the way over. Try to make it, whatever you do, make it even on all the sides. So the next step is to go to the hairdryer, check it with the back of your hand. Right now it feels cool. When it's dry, it's going to feel warm. And if any wrinkles start forming as you're waiting, when you use the hairdryer, that will take care of the wrinkles. So the next step is to save out the white areas, and they're using Mascoid or Masket, and theirs is yellow. It just has a coloring in it, and it's kind of like a glue that comes off when you rub it when it's dry later. Ours is blue. We're going to use a crow-quill pen. This just goes in the end like that. And then open this up. And dip the pen in just a little bit. You don't have to go very far. There's a little hole there. You probably want to go just past the hole and then rub it on the edge. And use this by pressing a little bit to get that to come out. Try not to scratch the paper. You just want it to flow on there. If you accidentally drop a blob on here, let it dry before you start painting and you can just rub it off. And we want that to dry before we start the painting. Okay, the beak needs a little bit. And then I think they also did this little boat back here. Because the lines are so tiny. To do the clouds, we're gonna wet the paper to kind of create a barrier so that the blue doesn't go down in here, and that's a better way to do it. But if you're nervous about it, you could take your wax crayon or your candle and draw it like this. But when you get to like a post, you want to lift up. So don't draw over your post or you're going to have a white line there. So now you're ready to start painting. So I've washed the nib from using the masket, and the masket is nice and dry now. There's a little separation between the top of this nib and the bottom. So when you're cleaning it, make sure that you kind of separate that and see the gap in there. And you can see it, but there's a little gap. So clean it and dry it so it doesn't rust. And make sure this is tacky and dry. It'll look a little bit shiny. And then it talks about the colors being gamboge yellow. We're just going to use yellow from our palette. And then it says burnt sienna. We're going to use brown mixed with a little bit of orange to make it warmer. And then it says alizarin crimson, so we're going to use red. Ultramarine blue, we'll use this blue. And it mentions phthalo blue, so we'll use turquoise. But you can use whatever blue you want. It's okay if it looks a little bit different. So we're going to block in with a transparent wash. 30%, it says, in general, the feel of the painting is washed in all at once with 30% wash. More than enough whites are left to be dealt with later. Warm blue sky overhead and warm foreground at our feet. So it looks like there's some grayish looking, I don't know, almost like a purpley color in here that they didn't mention what color they're going to use. So I'm going to use my dropper, dedicate one of these to being the clean water, put a few drops on the colors I know I'm going to use. I'm going to use a little bit of brown. And I'm going to add some orange to that. I like this yellow orange that's down below, so I'm going to use the yellow orange, add to my brown, just to warm it up a little bit. Here. And I want to save out this part here, this white. So I'm going to wet around it. I'm going to keep the board white. And the paper starts puffing out. So I'm going to start with my lightest color. So I'm going to do yellow first. Okay, so I would let that dry, and then I'm going to probably go back in later and darken some of that with what's called a transparent glaze. Some people call it an overwash. Dry your brush, rinse it, and now we want to go into the sky and make some of these grayish colors. Looks like there's a little bit of yellow over here, so I'm going to use my yellow right there. First I'm going to wet it. Let's wet the sky. So I'm kind of keeping the horizon line. Now this is dry now. If it wasn't dry, I would wait or use the hair dryer. So I'm just wetting this in the sky area. Okay, so this is sort of a grayish color, and to get a grayish color, if I mix a little bit of brown and blue together, I think I will get a gray. of like taking orange and blue, which are complements, and that will gray anything down. So I'm going to go in here and go right over the bird. And if I go into my sky, you can just take a finger and, with a dry finger, and pull it back. Or you can use a paper towel or a dry brush. Don't worry if it puddles. If it's puddling up, you can, use everything that's on your brush and then go back and pull from that puddle. Like that. Okay, so there's some areas that are a little bit darker, so I'm going to add just a little bit of this red orange to it. And just put that up in the top here while it's wet. Mix it in. Let that absorb them out. Lighten them now while it's still wet. Cloud, white cloud here. Maybe one here. Absorb just a little bit in the clouds. Pressing really hard. The very, very small piece. Now you're probably going to want to use tissue for this because the brown paper towels are too stiff. So put that, a little bit of that over here. Doesn't have to look exactly like the painting. It's nice if it's a little different. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry before I do the next step, which is putting in the red on the bottom of the boat and the green on this boat. I do want to put a little bit of that sort of sky color in there on the front of the boat. The boat's white, but it needs just a little bit, and I haven't wet the paper here, just going in dry. So now we're going to do the red of the boat here, and we're going to do this green color. We're not going to go directly into green, we're going to mix it. So, let's start with red. So this is the red. So I've dried the paint using the hairdryer. The way you can tell that it's really dry is if the paper is sort of wrinkly and then you dry it and it goes flat again, and you know it's nice and dry. So I can actually get some nice points for the grass down here. And I'm just going on this dry. I didn't pre-wet this area. I also did not mix the red, it's just straight red. If you want a deeper maroon red, you could add a tiny bit of green to it. For the first layer, I'm just using a watered down version of the straight red. In the directions it says alizarin crimson, which I don't have. And this is a rope, so I can go right over the rope because that's going to be a darker color. But I don't really want to go over the ladder. That's really close to that color. Alright, so again, I think for this one I can use the wider brush. And I don't want to go over this piece of wood because it is brown, but it's not real dark. That should give me sort of a maroon color. Yeah. If I want more red, I can add more red. I could actually add it right from the pan. That's a little too red, but let's see what happens if I clean my brush and then dip into it. That's better. So you can see how if you don't clean your brush, you have a lot of whatever you just put on it on the brush, and that's not a true showing of what color you just mixed. So now I'm going to dry my brush and then dip it in here and go over this again. And again, this is such a small area, I really should switch to this brush. I'm going to rinse my brush and dry it, and I'm going to use it as a sponge to absorb that color right there that I accidentally leave in there. I'll let that dry, and then when I go over it with the green, it should be fine. I still haven't done this little piece right here, so I'm going to see if I can do that very lightly. And it's bleeding in. If it's bleeding, always sponge it off, dry your brush, and pull it back. This looks a little too dark right there. So we can use the maroon color with a little bit more brown to do this part right here, and then maybe some of the green from the boat to do this over here. Add a little more brown to this. Maybe go right into the brown. And that is going to be this side. So it looks sort of like the red of the boat, but different. It's another shade of that red, like a maroon. So I'm drying, like rinsing and drying my brush, and while this is wet, I'm gonna blend in the edge. I'm just going from the edge and pulling down a little bit, drawing in between. Eventually I'm gonna do a darker line right there, but not right now while it's wet. This is going to be dark right there, but again, it needs to be dry. This has some kind of a blue thing over it, so let's put a little blue on there. I'm going to use this color here. And add a little bit more down here. Let's flick it upward so it looks like grass. But there's parts of this that have brown, like the ladder, this, whatever this stick is right here. Put that on. Whenever I'm doing a straight line, I want to be able to put my finger to balance. Make sure that that area is dry so you're not leaving a fingerprint. I'm only going to do 1/2 the stick right now, let that dry, and then I'll do the other half. Do a little bit on this one. You can try using a ruler if you want to get a straight line. So this is dry now, so I'm gonna decide. I think that I'll make this side darker than that side, or the other way around. I think I'll keep it consistent with this, so this one has the darker side on the right, so I'm gonna make a paler side on the left. So there's a lot of detail in this, so it's going to take me a while. I'll probably do a little bit of work on this, and then I'll come back on video towards the end to show you some touch-ups. But you're always going to work light to dark, so let things dry so they don't bleed into each other, and keep going. Notice that there's some blue over here. We still haven't done the water that's under this boat and comes over here. There's some blue up here. So, you know, make sure that you're going back and forth. And then when you feel like you're almost finished, that's when you take the masket off. So I spent a couple of hours on this, and it's really important to put in your rope lines last. You could use a ruler if you want, but sometimes it bleeds under. But if you're worried you don't have a steady hand, just don't have too much paint on the brush and use your ruler, paint next to it. And also when you're doing your ropes, remember that there's a little bit of shadow next to the rope in some places. And you can put your rope down and then put some grass over it. So the last thing I'm going to do is remove the masket. I'm just going to do that with my finger. So once that's removed and it's nice and dry, now you can paint in the details of the seagull and the little boat that's back there. So I'm going to do that. And you can see my palette is still pretty messy, but I like to leave it like that so that I can use some of the colors I've already used. So on this, let's look at the little boat. It's got sort of a maroon color on the bottom, right here, and then green, and this is sort of an orangey color. So I'm going to start with that green. So that's it for the boat. And now for the seagull. I'm actually going to use this maroon color again. Seagull. And we're going to blend that up on the hard edge by drying my brush, making sure my brush is clean. Just pull that up a little bit. And then it looks like he's got some blue under here. So I'll just use this blue. And that's a bit dark, but I can lighten it. Come down to the body. And do a little outline on the top of his back. A little bit under this wing. And then I do want to lighten that a little, so I'm just gonna clean my brush and dry it a little bit. So I can pull some of that color off. Test it on here. Still a little bit dark. Add water to that. Okay, roll around. Black just really takes over. Okay, let's try it. That's good. So I want this to be dry before I do the tips of the seagull's wings, so it's not bleeding in. blend it in a little bit. And it's done. So once it's done, you can sign your name down here. You can either use a Sharpie or you can paint it in, however you want to do it. I like to use whatever colors are on my palette and not just go into straight black. Let's take some red. And your signature does not have to be legible at all. To you how you want it to look. Once it's dry, now you're ready to take off the tape. So before you do, clean your palette a little bit just so you don't accidentally spill it on your finished painting. Make sure that your hands are clean before you start pulling the tape, and pull the tape at a 45-degree angle making sure you're picking up the top one first.